Now it's time for our discussion, like I mentioned, and we are taking a look at the recent development, the recent directive by the federal government. And he said the federal government has restored the supply of electricity to the Republic of Niger following the directive, of course. Nigeria and the land borders, the air borders with the neighboring country have been opened. So on August 3rd, 2023, the power supply for Nigeria to the Republic of Niger was stopped as part of sanctions against the neighboring country by the Economic Community of West African States, that is ECOWAS. And earlier in August last year, ECOWAS, led by Tinubu, imposed sanctions on Niger following a coup that toppled the country's president-elect, Mohamed Bazoum, in July 2023. And officers of the Niger Presidential Guard had on July 26, 2023, arrested Bazoum and declared him deposed. So in addition to a one-week ultimatum to restore constitutional order and the suspension of financial transactions, ECOWAS directed the freezing of all service transactions, including energy and transactions with Niger. Now that has been lifted. So the sanctions were, however, lifted on February 24th this year by ECOWAS, based on the resolution of the extraordinary summit of the Authority of Heads of State and Government, chaired by Tinubu at the State House in Abuja. So Tinubu on Wednesday now directed the opening of Nigeria's land and air borders with Niger. He also directed lifting of all the sanctions against the country with immediate effect. Now to unfold all of this and the impact that it has on business and Nigeria entirely, a man that has been here from the beginning. And we have been having this conversation since the sanctions started, all of this coup, the variant coups across Africa that we have discussed in recent months. We have in the studio Ambassador Haruna Warkani, who is formerly with the ECOWAS Commission and is Deputy Chair, Nigeria, United Nations Social and Economic Council. And he's also a security and international affairs expert. He's a man that wears a lot of cap, I tell you. But let's stay with this. Good morning to you and welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning, viewers.
And now, you know, all of this pronouncement by the president, it came not so much of a shock to a lot of people, but, you know, the directive has been given that land and air borders and some restoration of electricity and transactions have resumed. What can you make of this recent pronouncement by the president?
Well, I think it's a joy, we would say. It's joy to the citizens of both countries. Nigeria and Niger share common affinity, such that such opening of borders and then lifting of sanctions, restoration of electricity in particular, will bring about a new livelihood across the borders. And we must remember that when electricity was switched off, it affected Niger so badly because, one, the fact that it came suddenly, two, it was never expected, and then three, the dependence of Niger on Nigeria's electricity supply was almost total, and so it created so much problem within the country. And you know, now even the president of Burkina Faso is still very furious, saying he has to charge the president, chairman of ECOWAS, that's President Tinubu, for murder, mass murder, because a lot of people died as a result of the switching off of electricity. We must remember that when such things happen, there must be some people maybe in ICUs, that's intensive care units, in hospitals, children and the rest of them, a lot of things that are dependent on electricity. Once switched off suddenly, without prior or due notice, certainly will have its own repercussions. And that had happened and gone, kind of restored, electricity restored. However, like we said, sometimes last year, that act was very wrong, very, very wrong against any country, because electricity supply to Niger had nothing absolutely to do with ECOWAS. And therefore, the crisis in ECOWAS then shouldn't have affected the electricity supply to Niger. But that as it may be, on the economic sanctions, like we said, affects the poor more than the government for whom you are trying to extract some concessions or what have you. So when sanctions were imposed, borders were closed, financial, political, social, etc., etc. It had negative implications for the countries affected. But it also has a boomerang effect, because when you close borders, border closure means two-way thing. It's not coming in and it's not going out. And therefore, there were trade that was piling up in Niger coming into Nigeria and vice versa. And this has definitely impacted negatively on both economies of these countries. Now, Nigeria and Niger, however, are such that the borderlines are very porous. You don't really have a borderline, so to say, because there are no natural barriers demarcating these two countries. No river, no mountain, no valley, nothing absolutely on the ground to say this is the country here and that is the other one here. You stepped here, you are in this country, you step back, you are here. The border communities on both sides are literally the same people. From the Lake Chad area down to maybe Katsina, you will see that most of the citizens of Niger are Kanuris. They share common affinity with Kanuris in Borno and Yobe, Jigawa states. So when you say you've closed borders, yes, borders were closed officially, but trading was still going on. And we did say here on this platform, when you impose sanctions, sanctions don't work the way you always want them to be, because there are people who deliberately will want to bust these sanctions.
But as a nation, let's say the bloc now, ECOWAS, are in support of a democratic government. And then we saw a deviant of coups that was going to jeopardize what ECOWAS stands for. What could they have done better instead of the sanctions that was meted on these countries?
Well, dialogue, like it is happening right now, we have fought, let me say, in quotes, the bloc and the deviant countries, in quotes, have fought and now are back to the negotiating table, kind of, though it's becoming rather too late in a way, because these countries that have decided to leave ECOWAS are finding it very difficult to come back.
Why is that, though?
Yeah, they are enjoying a new freedom. They are enjoying the true independence that they never had since the 60s. This is the time that they are having. France is no longer here in their midst, creating all the problems that France had done over the years. So these countries have asserted themselves for the first time. And you can imagine a situation where the Minister of Finance in France has to dictate to these Francophone countries what happens with their economy. That's why you do not hear of anything like budgets in some of these countries, because their budgets are strictly controlled from France. Now those things are gone. Yes, there will be initial difficulties of settling down, because it's going to be a new paradigm. However, with time, these countries are definitely going to see that with their new acquired freedoms, they might be able to do some other things better than it has ever been done before. One of it would be like the announcement that, yes, Russia is willing, ready, and prepared to build a nuclear power station for these countries. Now, energy supply deficiencies and what have you have become so endemic that all our businesses in this sub-region in particular have been like down because of lack of energy, including Nigeria.
Of course.
Now, if we are to solve that energy problem alone, you will see what it will do to the economy, to social being, livelihoods, small businesses, and the rest of them. And that is what would be like the first dividend of the coups, let me say.
Because now that the sanctions have been dropped, a lot of people are expecting that, let's come back to the table. Let's have a negotiation. And like you mentioned, that's what should have been put first before the sanctions were meted in this country. Now, do you think that with these sanctions being dropped and the recent development of borders, air and land borders reopening, do you think that these agitations will stop? Do we see countries who will be returning to democratic government? Do we see nations who okay, I think we should come back to ECOWAS?
I think we should come back to ECOWAS maybe very far, very, very far to my mind, because like I said, these countries suddenly are enjoying new freedoms that never existed before. They've never woken up as a country to find that the French ambassador was no longer in their midst. They've never woken up to a day that France was no longer dictating to them what should happen in their country, as far away in Europe, and then you are dictating what should happen to African countries. Today, they have earned that. They have become truly independent in a way. And it now remains for these countries to fashion out some other new things. In that regard, it might be difficult to bring them back to the fold. ECOWAS needs to do a lot of work, a lot of background diplomacy to be able to bring these people back to the fold.
When you say a lot of work, it just brings in my head, what do they have to do? What back do they have to bring these people back?
Okay, there may be more concessions that ECOWAS has to do. Don't forget, sanctions were unilaterally imposed on these countries. And they said, okay, as a reaction to these sanctions, which to them were illegal, because sanctions ought to have been such that there would have been very cogent reason. The only reason being that there was a change of democratic governance in those countries. Now, ECOWAS, after some time, has realized that these people have said they are going, and they went without even due notice. They said they have taken sovereign decisions to leave the fold, and they left. The implications of leaving were so many. We've not really looked at that. Now, after some time, ECOWAS discovered that instead of dismembering such organization that had existed for over 40-something years, we have to do a rethink, because the implication was more countries were going to join this new confederation. And if they did do that, it means ECOWAS would have lost more than half of its mass, critical mass. Size of country, economy, land mass, etc. Strategic considerations made it impossible for ECOWAS to keep quiet while these countries go away. That's why ECOWAS, on its own, unilaterally again, lifted the sanctions following the extraordinary meeting of the heads of state and government. Now, you can see it was a loss of face for ECOWAS in the first place, because what you wanted to achieve with the sanctions never was achieved. The military rule is still in place. These guys are not even willing to negotiate now an exit date or elections or whatsoever, because they have been kind of emboldened to say, yes, we said you did it wrong, you got it very wrong, and now you have come back, you have literally taken back everything you said, and you have removed the sanctions by yourself. By yourself.
So this act now, does it mean that ECOWAS is losing its hold on the member countries?
ECOWAS has lost, for sure. ECOWAS has lost.
So what is the repercussion of all of this?
We must be honest with that. ECOWAS has lost its grip on the member countries, and then a big lesson has also been learned, that next time, no unilateral or illegal sanctions or precipitate actions taken on any member country like it has been done before. We did say here sometime last year, switching off light for a whole country was criminal, truly. There's nowhere anyhow it could have been done. And then when it was not even related to any ECOWAS matter, these countries' connectivity was based on a bilateral international treaty, not an ECOWAS treaty, because it predated even the formation of ECOWAS. This treaty predated the formation or coming into being of ECOWAS. So how do you now use something that happened to now say you are taking such a precipitate action? That has been done and the lessons have been learned. Now, there are other countries that are having problems that might also result into military coups. It's not only these three countries. And the danger ECOWAS was facing was that if you allow this to persist further, these countries might go the same way. And in that regard, you may have more countries under military rule, and if they so happened, they may also come around to say, okay, we want to even join this new confederation. That means ECOWAS might disappear in itself.
So what can ECOWAS do now to salvage the situation? Because as it seems now with the explanation and the different divergent views concerning this, it seems that things are looking bad for ECOWAS. What can they do to save their face?
Well, I think the chairman of ECOWAS particularly needs to do much more, like I said, background diplomacy, because some of these things might not need to come to the fore, public fore. But behind the scene, which we suggested here, some of the prominent leaders in this sub-region need to be engaged fully to go around and assuage these bad feelings that have been created, so that we can possibly reverse, if possible, some of these actions that have been taken already. Talk to these people. They are young men. They are hot-headed, yes. They have good reasons for what they have done, because, you see, we must be honest with ourselves. For instance, these three countries in particular, including Nigeria for a matter of fact, have been battling with insurgency for so many years. ECOWAS never did anything, took steps, kind of, to say, okay, let us assist with this insurgency and what have you. It has been, okay, organizing meetings with the United Nations to bring in the Blue Berets, peacekeeping missions, and the rest of them. However, physically on the ground, nothing happened. No intervention by ECOWAS in any of these insurgencies across Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and even Nigeria. The question is, where was ECOWAS in all this? I think that's a very critical point. Now, if you threaten these countries with invasion, military invasion, because of military coup, why not invade the terrorists when they were ravaging all these countries? You have a standby force. What was the use of the standby force? You leave it until a democratic government is overthrown. You say you are activating the standby force to go and invade a sovereign country. No, that was a wrong decision. Now, these are some of the key things that perhaps behind the scene, ECOWAS may need to emphasize. Hey, for the first time, we have taken a decision that the ravaging impact of these insurgencies, we might now use our standby force. By strengthening this standby force to actually intervene in these situations. Nigeria needs it badly. We are battling with kidnapping, we are battling with insurgency everywhere, here and there. So if the regional bloc has an effective standby force, let this standby force come in and assist these countries. That kind of offer would perhaps trigger some thinking to say, okay, maybe the organization suddenly has realized that there were some things that were done wrongly, but now, since we can have this kind of approach, perhaps, yes, let's give ECOWAS a chance, so that the confederation of the AES states can still come back, because that's going to be the most disastrous thing to allow to stem, to be sustained if ECOWAS is unable to reverse this. And the chairman of ECOWAS today would perhaps go down in history as one man that has come and in the shortest possible time has dismembered ECOWAS. I think that will be a very sad commentary wherever and whenever.
Okay.
So he needs to do everything within his powers to make sure this thing is reversed.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your contribution always on the show. And I've needed more time to discuss this, but as it stands now, we do not have time. But I would like to say thank you so much for finding that time to be a part of the show and explaining some of the intricacies that probably we didn't find to be, believing to us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
All right, so our guest has been Ambassador Warkani. Like I said, he wears a lot of cap, but of course he's an international and a security analyst, and he has been our guest on this show on bundling, the president directive on lifting the sanctions and opening air and the land borders to Niger. This is the end of our conversation.